Hi, I'm Clutch Caro, and this video is about calorie density. It goes by some other names like energy density or volumetrics, but if you're interested in losing weight or maintaining a healthy weight, definitely stay tuned. So this is more of a nutritional principle rather than specific dietary advice, but I think you'll find it useful. So this is a very well-researched topic. A lot of the research is done at Penn State, especially by Dr. Barbara Rolls and some of her colleagues. So this is a picture of Dr. Rolls. And I do want to give the caveat that caloric density is just one aspect of nutrition, and it's certainly not the end-all be-all, but it is very important if you're trying to lose weight without restricting the total amount of food that you're eating. So in order to lose weight, you're going to have to decrease your total caloric intake less than your total caloric expenditure, in other words, your total metabolic rate. And there are multiple ways to do that. One is to decrease the total amount of food that you're eating. Very difficult to do in the long run, but it certainly works. Another is to change the type of food you're eating such that it has less calories per mass of food. In other words, lower caloric density. So the type of unit that I use is calories per gram, calories with a big C, the type you see on the back of packages. And it doesn't matter if you know what a calorie is or if you know what a gram is, so long as you understand the concept. The reason I use calories per gram is because it creates a nice small number. For instance, water has 0 calories per gram, and oil has 9 calories per gram, and everything else is somewhere in between. And this is exemplified very well in this diagram, which shows 2 meal plans for a day, each with 1,575 calories. And you can imagine, if you ate the food to the right, you would be very full and satisfied. But if you ate the food to the left, you might be somewhat hungry throughout the day. You probably wouldn't feel very satiated. Now, satiety is a very complicated thing. It's regulated by the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus. It's influenced by things like ghrelin and leptin. And I'm not going to get into the science behind satiety, but a large part of satiety is simply mediated by filling up your stomach with mass by exploiting the stretch receptors in your stomach. And if you look at this diagram, you can see that 400 calories of oil is a very small volume and barely fills your stomach at all. And you're not going to feel full, and you're going to want to eat more food. 400 calories of chicken fills your stomach up part way, but 400 calories of vegetables, things that are lower in calorie density, fill up your stomach much more, and you're much more likely to feel satiated and to not eat further. So what is it that determines calorie density? Well, one aspect is the ratio of macronutrients. For instance, fats and oils have the highest calorie density with 9 calories per gram, whereas proteins and carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. In case you're wondering, alcohol has 7 calories per gram and dietary fiber has almost nothing. However, believe it or not, this is actually the smaller factor, and it turns out that the larger factor is simply water and fiber. And if you take a look at this study, which reveals a scatter plot examining the relationship between water content in different foods and the calorie density, you can see a clear association between the amount of water and the calorie density. To the left of the graph, you can see that the distribution of macronutrients does have an influence. For instance, in the left upper corner are foods that are very high in fat content. But as you move to the right, water predominates. It washes everything out, pun intended. And if we look at some of the macronutrients from the same study, we can see they do have an effect. For instance, fat is shown in the scatter plot on top, and as there's more fat, the calorie density tends to go up, and with carbohydrates on the bottom, as you go to the right, the caloric density converges on 4 because carbohydrates themselves have 4 calories per gram, and as you go to the left, other factors predominate because there just aren't that many carbohydrates. And Dr. Rolls demonstrated the importance of this principle in practice, and she did a study where she took 18 normal weight women, and she put them each on 3-day diets. One had low calorie density, one had medium calorie density, and the other had high calorie density. And she had them eat, and they could eat as much as they wanted until they were full. But as you can see, they ended up eating about the same amount of food. If you look at this graph, the lines are almost exactly on top of each other. The mass of food was relatively constant, regardless of the type of diet they were eating. But if you look at the total calories that they consumed, all of a sudden, there's a huge difference now. And the group that ate the lowest calorie density ate the least amount of total calories, and the group that had the highest calorie density diet had more total calories, even though they were eating the same amount of food. And this just really accentuates the idea that we tend to eat a certain amount of food. We eat until we're full. We eat ad libitum, as they say. But it's what we eat that will influence our total caloric intake and whether or not we successfully lose weight. And to look at a few examples, take a look at some of these foods. So, for instance, cucumber at the top of the list, only 0.14 calories per gram, not a lot of starch, not a lot of sugar, very watery, has a high fiber content. A little bit more calorie dense is watermelon, and you can taste that sugar, you can taste that sweetness, but it just is so watered down that it still is very dilute and has very few calories per gram. Corn is a little bit starchier, 0.82 calories per gram. Bananas, you can taste the sugar, not as much water, 0.86 calories per gram. Lobster, one of the leaner meats, but it has a lower water content. It has protein, which is 4 calories per gram, not as much fiber, so it's a little over 1 calorie per gram. Avocado, it's a vegetable, but fairly high fat content. So even though it has that fiber and that water, it's still just under 2 calories per gram at 1.83. Dates, which are dried fruits, for instance, in this category, usually these are higher than you would expect because they lose the water content. You take away the water, you're left with the sugar and the fiber just isn't enough. It just doesn't have enough of a proportion of the overall mass of the food to reduce the caloric density. So it's pretty high at 2.8. Corn flakes are 3.5 calories per gram. What happened there? Corn is 0.82, corn flakes are 3.5. You've refined your food. You've taken away the water and the fiber, and you're left with the carbohydrates. So most refined carbohydrates are sort of in this category, around 2.5 to 4 calories per gram. And then to jump up even more, macadamia nuts, the highest calorie density nuts, have a very high fat content, even though they're high in micronutrients, even though it's monounsaturated fats that confer some cardiac benefit perhaps. They're still very high in calorie density and certainly will not help you lose weight. And then, of course, the absolute killer of killers, oil of any kind, it doesn't matter if it's olive or canola, 9 calories per gram. You can see that it's almost 100-fold higher than cucumbers. And you can eat 100 times as much cucumber as you can oil for the same number of calories. And it really makes you think that perhaps this isn't such a healthy food after all. At least if you're trying to lose weight. If you're trying to gain weight, then oil and nuts come highly recommended for me. So that's all I have. Please take a look around my website, take a look at the list tab, and I compile calorie density of various types of foods. And if you're watching this on YouTube, the links are below. Thank you.